This module will provide a high-level overview of what is called the Spanish century. A combination of events in Europe made possible the so-called discovery and exploitation of the Americas. The Spanish were the first to accomplish this, and largely because of the destructive consequences of the Reformation. During the 16th century, other European powers were not able to challenge Spanish dominance in the Americas. Thus, the 16th century is often referred to as the Spanish century. This segment will include an overview of the socio-political situation in the Americas, touching the encounter between Europeans and Americans, and some of the consequences of that encounter. Europeans ventured to the Americas primarily for profit, and the nature of their interaction with the indigenous populations was heavily influenced by the type of economic systems they encountered. In the early 16th century, two distinct types of societies existed in the Americas, those based on surplus economies and those on subsistence economies. A surplus economy is characterized by a segment of the population producing more than is necessary for basic survival, with the excess typically accumulating among the upper echelons of society. In contrast, a subsistence economy, often seen in nomadic hunter-gatherer societies, involves everyone contributing equally to meet the basic needs of the community, fostering a sense of inherent equality. The Spanish first encountered subsistence economies in the Caribbean, where the indigenous people worked collectively for communal sustenance. This system of living typically evolves from a nomadic lifestyle to a settled one, as people discover reliable food sources like agriculture, which allows them to remain in one location and build permanent structures. This shift gives rise to what we know as civilizations, a term derived from the Latin civis, meaning city. It is important to note that civilization in this context merely indicates a societal choice to live in cities without any inherent qualitative judgment. As these societies became more settled, social stratification began to emerge. For example, in the Aztec society, initially based on communal work, a hierarchy developed over time. This hierarchy comprised various levels, from slaves and peasants to craftsmen and merchants, and ultimately to the nobility and rulers like Montezuma II. Montezuma is remembered as the emperor of the Aztecs, but the office of Tlatoani, which he occupied, was more a combination of ruler in consultation with other nobles and supreme religious figure. Also, although he is known in the English-speaking world as Montezuma, his name in his native language Nahuatl was Motekuxoma Xocoyotzin. Upon their arrival, the Spanish encountered these diverse societal structures. In areas with subsistence economies, they realized that the value lay in the land rather than the people, as there was no surplus production. Consequently, the indigenous populations were often displaced, enslaved, or worse. In contrast, in surplus economies like the Aztecs, the Spanish aimed to replace the existing upper class with their own, redirecting the wealth flow to themselves. This approach necessitated maintaining the existing social structure to preserve the source of wealth. The only major change to the social structure was the imposition of Christianity, forcing an end to human sacrifice which was practiced extensively. One simplistic critique of the Spanish conquest is that the Spanish came, deliberately killed the natives, and took their land and wealth. It is true that the Spanish eventually acquired much of the land and wealth of the natives as the native population declined rapidly, but this was not accomplished by deliberate genocide. The Europeans came with diseases the natives had no immunity to, with devastating consequences to the native population. This was actually a hindrance to Spanish intentions because in a surplus economy, the wealth is produced by the people. With fewer people, less wealth is created. The hierarchical native social structure collapsed, leaving a stratum of just indios. In reality, It would have made little sense for the Spanish to do away with the main source of their wealth. The demographic catastrophe led to a labor crisis for the Spanish colonizers. Lastly, a note on terminology. We often use the term Indians to describe the indigenous peoples of the Americas, acknowledging its historical inaccuracy but recognizing its general understanding. It's important to remember that this term does not accurately reflect the diverse origins of these populations, which are more accurately referred to as Native Americans or First Nations peoples. We will look more closely at some of the aspects of the New World encounter in the next few segments. Before I move on, I want to comment that the Black Legend, which we will discuss later, lays the blame for the destruction of American societies at the feet of the Spanish. We should note, however, that when other European powers encountered Americans, their dealings with them were similar to the Spanish in that economics was an important aspect of how the Europeans dealt with natives. Please proceed to answer the questions in the assignment on Canvas. If you have any questions, you can post them in the open forum discussion or contact the professor using Canvas email.